All right, welcome back to the garage, everyone. We're continuing on the 1981 Alfa Romeo Spider Veloce project. And today we're going to do a little regular maintenance type project. We're going to be exchanging out the sealed beam headlights on this S2 Spider. Why don't you follow along with me? One thing I wanted to mention before we get started, we want to make sure that the battery is disconnected, and in this case the battery is located in the trunk of the Alfa Romeo. It's always a good idea to disconnect the battery when you're doing any electrical work, so just thought I'd mention that before we get started. Alright, this video might not be for everyone, but it's more geared towards a person who might be getting into the classic car hobby and has never really done any regular maintenance on their vehicles. So it's a fairly straightforward process if you've done it before, but if you haven't done it before, it's always good to have a little bit of a video guide, how-to maybe boost your level of confidence a little bit. I haven't seen a video on how to exchange a sealed beam headlight on an Alfa Romeo on YouTube, so I thought I'd do one while I was going to be doing it anyway. Hopefully this will help some new owner, or perhaps a existing owner who's had the car for a while, who wants to start dipping their fingers into doing regular maintenance on their car instead of taking it to the shop. Before I start here, I just wanted to make mention that I believe the Euro spec Spiders, not delivered to North America, might have had a different style of light bulb. They were not necessarily sealed beam units, and potentially the earlier Spiders may have had non-sealed beam units as well. And what I mean by sealed beam is that the bulb cannot be changed at all. It's one piece, whereas the other European style, I'm going to refer to them as European style, the bulb can actually be exchanged from the rear of the light bulb. And there's actually, in this car, even though it's not going to be utilized for this process, let me see if I can get the camera up here, there's actually an access panel to get to the back of the bulb. I don't know if you can see it there, but there is the access panel to be able to get to the rear of the bulb if you have a non-sealed beam style unit. Alright, let's move on. Now the lights on this car are currently operating as they should, and the lens is not broken, but I'm still going to be upgrading this light to a little bit better performance light. So we've got an Extra Vision H6024 bulb, which is a 7-inch round bulb. It's a halogen bulb made by Sylvania. Has a brighter light and a better pattern, so we're just going to try to improve the existing sealed beam units with something a little bit better. So that's what we're in the process of doing today. So this process I'm showing you today is obviously specifically for the Alfa Romeo Spider S2, but there are a ton of similarities with most older vehicles, I'm going to say, that have these sealed beam units. Really there's differences on how the outside surround comes off. In some cases they might just be a push fit. In the Alfa Romeo's case, there's actually a Phillips screw in the bottom that's holding this trim ring on. But the process is pretty much the same for the Alfa Romeo versus many other classic cars. My Triumph TR250 that's over here undercover is pretty much the same process that we're going to be following along here, with the exception that the outer cover or the trim ring is actually a push fit versus a Phillips screw. Alright, having said that, the first step in the process as far as removing the trim ring on the Alfa Romeo is to remove this Phillips screw here at the bottom. So I'll set you up on the tripod and we'll do this together. Alright, let's begin by removing that Phillips screw here on the bottom. You can, if you're worried about it, you can actually lay a towel down here, microfiber towel, to prevent from scratching the paint if you happen to drop the screwdriver. I'm trying to just be careful and not do that, since I think that'll probably obstruct your view if I do. So hopefully, as mentioned, your screws will not be rusted in there, and they should come out fairly easily. Now I'm following the manual process, and that says to pull the bottom of this out of the trim ring. It wants you to pull the bottom towards the front of the car. So we've got our trim tool here, and we're just going to try to get it in the side here and give that a little bit of a pry. And as you can see, we've moved the front out here. And then after you move the front up, you should be able to push upwards and release it from the car. So you'll see a little bit of a clip here at the top. See if I can get you in there. So that clip fits into a recess here on the top. So you just really need to lift up to release that. And you can see there's a little locating tab here in the bottom that will go dead center down the bottom, just below the actual screw. Alright, let's have a look at the screws here on the inside, and you're going to see actually 5 screws, and you're only going to, at this point in time, you're only going to manipulate 3 of them. So you'll see a screw top dead center and one to the right of that. The top dead center is actually an aim adjustment screw. You do not want to touch that. There's also another adjustment screw over here in the left side of the retaining ring. You don't want to touch that. The 3 screws you're going after actually hold this retaining ring in here, and you can see them here. They actually have a slotted opening beside them. So there's one here. I think you can see that in the camera. There's one down here. You can get that in there. And there's one here. So we're primarily going after the 3 screws that hold this retaining ring. You're not going to remove them. You just want to loosen them so we can actually spin the retaining ring to release the bulb. We'll do that together on camera. Alright, hopefully you'll be able to see this okay. Now you might need a slightly smaller Phillips screwdriver for this next process, as these screws are fairly small. So we're just going to loosen up these 3 screws. Not going to take them out entirely. If they do come out, no big deal. You can always back them back in. But just loosen them off. And as mentioned, once you get them loose, you should be able to spin this retaining ring. Okay, and remember, this is holding the bulb in. So be careful when you remove this retaining ring, because the bulb is going to want to fall forward. So all you need to do is turn this into the areas provided for the screw heads to come through. Then you're going to remove that, like so. Hand on the bulb. Put this up here. Okay, and then that will release the bulb, like so, and you can get to the connector at the back. Again, this is why it's a good idea to have a cloth here. You can actually set the bulb down. So I'm going to grab a cloth here behind me and just rest this on the cloth, and then we'll pick it up at the next step. Alright, here is a look at the back of the bulb, and you can see the plastic connector there. That is just a push fit, so all we're going to do is we're going to pull that off the back of the bulb, and we'll get ready to install the new bulb. I'll bring it back once that bulb is removed so you can see the connector a little bit more clearly. And just a quick shot of that 3-pin connector, and that will match up with the connections on the rear of your bulb. I think what we'll do now, before we progress, and this is just me, I'm going to clean out that bucket while I have the access. I'm also going to clean the area around the light, and we'll get a little bit of wax in there, just for some preventative measure, before we go on to the next step of putting the new bulb in. So let's clean that area up a little bit. Again, not necessary, but it's something I have to do. Alright, the next 2 steps are optional, so I'll leave it up to you whether you want to do them or not. It's always a good idea while you're in there. I'm going to get a little bit of WD-40 here, any kind of silicone spray, or oil for that matter, and we're just going to give those screws a little bit of a squirt. So the next time we come back here, these will not be rusty, and we should be able to adjust these with ease. So always a good idea to do a little bit of preventative maintenance if you can in the process. So that is done. And the other thing we're going to want to do, and again, this is something I'm going to do, you might necessarily not want to do this, but I'm going to put a little bit of dielectric grease or silicone grease on the connector for the light bulb. And the reason we do that is to first keep out moisture and keep out corrosion, and to create better connectivity with the socket and the bulb. So a little bit of dielectric grease. Alright, one more optional step, and yes, there are more optional steps than there are real steps to this project, But me being me, again, while I'm in there, here is the retaining ring. And as you can see, it's got a little bit of dirt and a little bit of dull finish to it. So I think what we'll do, actually even a little bit of surface rust there, if you can see that. So all we're going to do before we put this retaining ring back on is we have a little bit of metal polish here. In this case, we've got a product called Simichrome, or sorry, Autosol, but Simichrome is a similar product. So we're just going to hit this with a little bit of Autosol, and we're going to polish that retaining ring. Although you can't really see a lot of it, you can really only see the outer edge of it. We still want to make that look the best that we can while we're in there. Alright, we've got our new bulb in place and just pushed into the plastic connector in behind. So now we're just about to put the retaining ring on. So I should mention there are a couple of little areas in the back of the bulb that you need to sort of centralize. So let me just lift you up here. And you can see on the back of the bulb here, there's probably a little indent here. And you can see a little indent here. And that's to keep the bulb from spinning primarily. So you want to make sure that the indents are lined up. There's also one on this side over here. I don't know if you can see that or not. But we want to make sure those are lined up. And then we're going to put the retaining ring back on. Put you back down. So get those little nubs lined up. Like so. We'll move the rag carefully. We're going to put the trim ring back on. And I believe this one had the Corello symbol at the top. So we'll put that back on and find the locating areas. So I believe those are on now. We'll slide that back to the right hand side to lock it in. Hopefully you can see that. Slide it to the right. And then once it's slid to the right, like so, and we should be able to let that go, and we can tighten that down, and the bulb is now installed without obviously the retaining or the trim ring, but we've got the bulb installed so it's in the correct position. So we'll go ahead and we'll tighten down those retaining screws now. I like to do them a little at a time and come back and snug them up. And make sure you have the retainer on behind the stud. Sometimes it's easy to miss one. And don't over tighten them or they'll snap. They're not the largest of fasteners, so be mindful of that. Just snug them up, but don't go gorilla on them. Okay, that's good. So next part of the process is to put the outside chrome finishing trim ring on. So we'll go ahead and we'll do that now. Alright, let's take one little step back before we go any further. Now if you'd wanted to at the previous step before you put the retaining ring on, you could have checked to make sure that the light that you installed actually works by rehooking up the battery and flipping the lights on. I'm pretty confident we're okay with this brand new bulb, so I've skipped that step. But if you're worried about it, you can definitely do that step before you get to the next step. Otherwise you're going to have to undo what you've done. Like I said, I'm pretty confident this is going to work okay, so we'll go on to the next step, which is installing the exterior trim ring around the bulb. Alright, so the last thing we're going to do is we're going to reinstall the chrome surround, and I've just given it a quick polish, so that's looking good and ready to go. So all we do is the reverse procedure. We're going to put the little tangs at the top here and let that drop down. We'll push it down a little bit. Hopefully you can see that. Push the bottom in. Line it up with the Phillips screw hole here on the bottom. That's looking good there. We've got our screw standing by. We'll get our slightly larger Phillips screwdriver for this one. And we'll screw this in. Probably can't do it with without blocking the camera. I'll give it a shot here. You're kind of in my way. I think we'll probably come back. Yeah, let me do that off camera, because I need to kind of move over where you guys are. Alright, we just gave it a quick finishing polish and it's back installed in the car, and we'll test it now, make sure it's working as it should. So that will end the step-by-step process to installing a sealed beam unit in an Alfa Romeo Spider. Again, this is very similar to doing any classic car that you might have. So as I mentioned previously, the outer trim rag might be affixed a little bit differently. Some of the internals might be a little bit different, but the process is pretty much the same. You may see 3 adjustment screws for the actual headlight aiming. You might see 2 or you might see 1. So those internals might be slightly different. But for the most part, if you can do an Alfa Romeo Spider, you can pretty much do any classic car that uses a sealed beam unit. Alright, that's it for now, guys. Thanks for watching, commenting, and subscribing. We'll see you on the next video. Arrivederci!